So, okay. So this is SIG Network Policy Sub-Project meeting. Today is November 2nd. This is an official meeting, so yeah, please be nice with each other. Let's get started. So I'm gonna share my screen, and for the agenda today, we have, I put 10 minutes for CAP reviews, but we can take longer. 30 minutes as proposed by Edward to discuss about the FKDN proposal. And in the final 5 minutes, if we don't get any other subject, to take a look if people have seen the QPROC V2 proposal and the decoupling and how this is going to impact in our sub-project either. But we can make things, we can left this for the for Slack. So Jay, we have your CAP as first. I think look into that, and I've seen that Dan Winship left some comments, and you also made some updates. So do you want me to go through it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, I went ahead and updated all the kind of some of the minor comments at least, but then the thing I'm wondering is, I kind of want to look again into the virtual labels thing because it keeps coming up. So he brought it up again, and then that's question number one. And then question number two that I have is what we want to do as far as that whole regex notation with the star and the, I didn't really mind it that much, but now I'm like, I don't really have strong feelings about it. So I was just, I don't know if,
yeah,
I'm going to probably think about it and update it in a couple of days. But if anybody else wants to either push another idea up or pull request into the repo or update the doc, I'm happy to.
So in my opinion, I've also put it's like, because the original proposal of namespace by name and was to have like rejects, and in the port range was to have exceptions, and we have removed the exception from the port range and the rejects from namespace by name. So I want to bring this up again and see if we are comfortable with removing those things from the user stories. Like, in my opinion, I don't think that like rejects is well, we really need that, because I think that if you start needing a lot of rejects for the namespace match, it's going to become complicated for the user either.
I agree that we probably don't want to support regex because security implications, like you can create a namespace that matches the regex. But I do think that, like Zhang brought up a good point last time around being able to support all namespaces in a way. So like, I'd be in favor of, you have to specify either like an actual namespace or a wildcard that says all namespaces. Because I think there's actual like pretty valid use cases for being able to select every namespace except,
I thought I originally thought that, and then now I'm kind of like, now that I'm being kind of like, now that I'm actually writing a CAP and I'm actually supposed to really justify it in terms of user stories, it's a weird thing because it's a global, it's like, it's kind of a hacky way of implementing a global cluster scoped policy. And it feels, I don't feel like I have a, I don't know, that it doesn't appeal to my intuition well enough to write it up. Like I like it as an idea. I don't feel super comfortable like making a bulletproof argument around it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to exclude anyone else from making that argument, but I feel like it, I don't know, what do y'all think? Do you think we can make a good argument around it, or do we think it's just an idea that we like?
Mind if I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this for the ingress egress, like the network policy selector, or I'm sorry, the namespace selector piece? Is that in the same scope?
It's the namespace. Yeah, it's the namespace part.
Well, so can't you use the selector just to do like you could do like match expressions to select all namespaces? Isn't that already possible?
I mean, so Zhang's idea was that you have a way of selecting all namespaces and excluding a certain one. That was the source he was going after. But yeah, you could allow all namespaces, but you'd have to do that on a per namespace basis, right?
I think
Like you'd have to do it for every.
I think the key difference here would be that the match expression still works on labels, while what Jay is trying to propose is that we would want to match based on names instead of the labels.
So I have a suggestion to say I feel like we shouldn't support regex because first it's pretty complicated. Second, that it's existing network policy doesn't support any regex anyway. Like for example, label selector doesn't support label regex matching. So we don't need to support that. If we want to select all, maybe we can just use the way that network policy does is to say if you have a match name as array, like empty array, it matches all. Would that be similar to say, okay, allow everyone? Just a quick way to say that allow everyone. Would that make sense here? Just to simplify things. I mean, I still don't see a way to do a reverse match, but since it's not supported, I don't know if I actually couldn't find a good way to support the reverse match. So unless we do this match name except.
That was the other thing he mentioned, which is kind of, I guess, makes sense. Match all except.
Right. Maybe just add a keyword there. I mean, that could make this simpler and easier to understand and catch probably most use cases.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a good point that like we don't want to not support the matching everything anymore because we already support it. It feels to me like this namespaces name thing is a workaround for a specific set of use cases, and it wasn't. I don't know. It feels like most of the use cases people had didn't come from that wanting to match everything need. It came from other issues like not being able to label certain things so that they did match a namespace. So they did match a policy. But if the group feels strongly that we should keep that global selector, then I mean, I guess, yeah, I can update the KEP to say we want a global selector, and
I think we can revisit it. Like I do think the global selector is useful, but I feel like, yeah, like if we feel like we're gonna get pushback because of that, like I'm cool to keep it up and then we can revisit it as a follow-up. I'd be fine with that. Unless someone here like really strongly thinks that like it's required. Because there is also the caveat that like if you introduce the field without supporting it, then you have to deal with like version skew and which versions support wildcards and which versions don't. So like ideally when you add the field, it also supports it. But yeah, like no, it's doable to add it after. So.
Yeah. So Zhang is definitely in favor. I'm neutral, slightly negative. Andrew, it sounds like you're in favor. Is anybody
What's the argument against it again?
What's that?
What's the argument against it again? Is it that like none of the use cases were really like focused on having the catch-all namespace selector anyways, and so it feels like we're kind of just adding like kind of like sugar on top of what we're actually trying to accomplish.
I kind of feel like, yeah, like, not that I'm against it. I feel like it's a good Trojan horse to put some cool functionality in there, but I feel like I don't know if I can make an argument to do that that's really rock solid. So, I mean, that's a good question. What is the real argument for why we need a global match for names? What is the argument we should make for that? I don't have a good argument against it, but what's the user story for it that we really, really feel like is really important?
For example, if we want to say everyone is allowed to talk to kubeDNS, just example, how should we define that right now?
As an ingress rule, anybody can access kubeDNS. I mean, that's an empty ingress label selector, right?
If you have empty, it only means everything kube system namespace, right?
Yeah, there's no.
Right. If you want to say all parts in all namespace are allowed to talk to kubeDNS, what's the way? If I don't have that on top of your head.
Is that an empty namespace? That's not an empty namespace select. Okay.
Is that an empty namespace selector? Will that work? I mean, if that works, then probably we don't need this.
Empty namespace selector would logically match any pod, regardless of what labels it had. Or an empty pod selector would, right? I think
so. I think that if you have like empty selectors and only the port, you have like that port open for any traffic. So it's a match all for the ingress. I think I need to confirm, but I think that's the way it works.
Yeah, it's a clumsy way of matching things, which I think
I would assume that you would write a empty pod selector in every namespace and have a two rule egress rule for the match name kube system namespace and pod selector as whatever the core DNS pod label are. I would assume that would work, but you will have to create a policy in every namespace.
Assuming that you have
a match name.
Yeah, if you had activated policies on a pod, then you would need a corresponding egress rule, is what you're saying, I guess.
Yes, and similarly an ingress rule.
So worst case scenario is you have to label every pod. You have to have a network policy for every pod in your cluster.
No, what I meant was you apply the policy to all the pods with an empty selector. And in your ingress egress rule, you have a namespace selector with match name or whatever J proposes to match the names. And you include kube system as the name so that you don't need to label your namespaces. And then for core DNS pods, you additionally add the pod selector to that namespace selector and match for the core DNS pods.
So you'd need a policy in every namespace.
But because unless you have the cluster scope policy, I don't think you can achieve these.
Right. This is what we do right now, and we apply a selector on top of kube system that says like kube DNS essentially lives in there, and then we have a network policy put into every namespace that allows egress to it. That's what we do right now.
Yeah.
But if you do egress rule, that means every pod needs to have other egress rule to allow whatever they talk to, right?
Yeah, we force all namespaces to have their own network policies by putting like a default denial. And the default denial has basically a rule to allow DNS as the only exception.
So digging through the notes from last time, I think the reason why we introduced the wildcard is because we were talking about it in the context of having an accept list. But if we're not introducing an accept list, then supporting the wildcard is the same as putting in an empty namespace selector. So in that case, then I agree with Jay that we don't really need it. because you can accomplish it with an empty namespace selector anyways.
Okay. I'm fine with that too. Yeah. I mean, or if we can have an empty namespace vector, we just achieve the same thing, then right. And then if we don't do exception, I think we are good then.
Yeah, so I think the question is really, should match names have an accept field where you can say allow kubedns but not every other namespace?
I don't think you should. I think it gets really hard to. Oh, actually, we do have precedent for accept fields because we have the cider blocks.
Yeah, I don't think we need a block on that question. Like, I think we should just roll with match names and just a list of names, and we can revisit that question in the future.
Like adding this as another field in the future, right, Andrew?
I mean, I feel like that's what my intuition tells me is the right thing to do, but you know, I'm happy to go back and forth on it. It's not, you know.
Yep, I agree. I don't think we need to address the exceptions now.
But Andrew, by the way, welcome. I didn't knew the other Andrew D. I don't think you've ever come before, so it's really cool that you're helping us out.
Yeah, I just thanks for having me. I just figured I'd join because it seemed like the topic list was relevant to some of the problems that we've had as of late.
Yeah, where are you from? What do you work on?
I work at Cloudflare. We have some large Kubernetes clusters, and I maintain them. So previously was at Red Hat. So yep.
Welcome.
Keep showing up, man. Keep hanging out with us. It's great. Okay.
So can we move forward to the port range?
Yeah.
Great. So about the port range, I think that almost every question that was made by Dan, Abhishek, and Andrew, I could answer or I could update in the cap. The only thing that I still have as a question is that if we want to follow with the exception proposal in the port range, or if the proposal of having like a subset of ranges and not covering the exceptions is enough for us. Do you get it, folks? Andrew, you are with a face of question. I don't know if you
sorry, because I was trying to find the tab where I had it open.
Okay.
You're basically asking, should we, basically what we were just talking about for namespace by names, should we include the exception right now or later?
In the port range cap.
Right.
Also. So I have the cap here. It's almost done. And the main question that I think you also made in Slack is like if we are dropping the exception in a port range field or if we are keeping it. So I put some thoughts about that. Like if we support exceptions, we need to make sure that the exceptions doesn't conflict with single ports, or how are we going to deal with that? And if that's going to be confused for the users. Otherwise, I don't know if like we are not going to support exceptions if everyone agrees that right now we are not going to support exceptions in the port range, and if we can move forward asking for the review from the cap leads, from the SIG leads.
So not supporting exceptions would mean that you'd have to specify a separate range for every exception in the range, right? Like you'd have to say like 100 to 199 and then 201 to whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what I put in the comments, but I have no strong opinion about that. Like if this is something that we want to do right now, or if we want to insert the exception like as an array field, or also you asked if exception was going to be a port range either. or just like an array of integer ports.
It's really hard to enforce. If we can get away without it, it's a lot easier to just have affirmative logic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, my understanding for the original reason why we talked about exceptions is that it's pretty common to like kind of single out single ports in large ranges. But if we're saying that it's not that common and it complicates the API, then yeah, I guess remove it.
I think we're saying it maybe still is common, but it's harder to do, but it does complicate the API, right? So,
I think we should gauge it based on like what the use cases we gathered were. Like, well, is the use case for port ranges almost always like, I have another cluster and I want to allow all the no port ranges? Because if that's the majority of the use cases, then I agree you don't need exceptions. But if a large majority of the use cases are around like allocating large chunks of ports, but they're kind of like staggered, then exception makes sense.
Two killer use cases that I remember were VM, like kubevert type use cases, where you have a VM that's running as a container and you want it to just have the ability to do whatever it wants. And the other one was like FTP, right? Was that it? FTP does some kind of weird dance
FTP. Egress connection to FTP. We have the node port one, like if I want to connect to the node ports of another cluster. And we have this one that Abhishek pointed in the user stories about a user that wants to allow anything except the connection to the to the port from the metadata server from the Google Cloud or from the AWS. He wanted to block like you can go anywhere in the port 80s except like I can't remember what was the case, but
yeah, I think
something like that. Yeah.
If you see the comment right after my suggestion, I think by B. Rathod, that one, right after.
Right below it. Scroll down a bit.
Scroll down, yeah. This one, the next comment. I think that's exactly what he wants. This is the one who raised the issue. That he needs only port 6379 to be blocked or not open. So I think that is the only use case which we can solve with an except. But if we propose just allowed port ranges, then instead of writing a port instead of writing down each and every port, we do two ranges. That would be like 6000 to 6378 and 638.0 to 9000.
Even there, it's the exact same amount of lines, right? Like in this one use case.
I mean, it's the same amount of lines, but the readability is just awful.
Yeah.
You have to specify two ranges because the port you actually care about is not in the actual API. And so you have to like read between the lines and figure out what you're actually trying to do there.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. So with an except, it's more readable as to, okay, this exactly is what the user intends. Otherwise, you have to, as Andrew suggested, read between the lines.
To be honest, I think that like exception is like a desired field either. I'm just worried about how we are going to validate if you put an exception and you have like a bunch of port ranges and a port range overrides another one. So like you have two port ranges and one overrides another one and you have an exception field inside one of them.
So are you saying that, so what I'm hearing is that we want exceptions, but we're worried about whether the validation is possible?
Yeah, I'm mostly worried about the validation.
Okay, but we agree that exceptions is generically useful and we'd want it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think we can work. I think we can work with that. Like, I agree that validation logic is complicated, but it seems doable if we just kind of keep iterating on that logic.
API machinery, they forbid me to use regexes, so expect like a lot of force, whiles, do, while, true, infinite loops. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
I mean,
but,
good in a is this the type of thing that the API server can just validate? Is that what you're thinking? I don't know much about how the API. It seems like you make this, it's a synchronous response from the Kubernetes API server because it can do some quick math and say you have a, you have a collision or something like that. I don't know. Is that
I think the collision needs to be validated only for that single policy object, not across policies, right?
Yeah, but in a single policy, you might have like a lot of port ranges, because ports is an array. So I can have like a port range and another port range, and those two port ranges, they might have conflicts, and then you might have like inside one port range an exception. But I think I agree with Andrew that this is doable, even if we we write every port range in an array, in a map or anything like that, and you can like see if that already exists and remove that and say, oh, you already have that. I don't know. You might have some workaround to do that. So do you agree that I will update the cat to insert the except as an array of integer fields inside this struct here. Inside this struct here, the network policy port range, I wanna add also an except that it's an array of integers. Is this fine?
I think so. Do you want to spend some time talking about what the validation would look like?
Yeah, I think it would be great. So we can spare some time in the reviews and make this move forward. But if you cannot move this here, like also so we can keep things going, I think it would be great to discuss this in Slack, like have a thread in Slack of how we are going to validate that.
Yeah, we just
either both ways work for me. So yeah, let's move to Slack this one, and then we can move forward with the FKDN proposal, right? I don't see Gobin here. I don't know if he wants to talk about that. Otherwise, we can go through another user story.
So one quick, with respect to the port range, I think I had an action item from last week because in the Dan, I think mentioned that their OVS based plugins may have an issue. So I did some digging, and some of the folks on Antria side are also trying to solve it in this fashion. So if you look at the Open vSwitch document, the TCP destination, or in general the field for ports allows you to set a port with a mask. So if you don't set a mask, then it basically means that your rule will be validated against just or matched against just that one particular port number. But you could also do some sort of a mask for bitwise. I think the documentation gives a good example and explanation on how to use it. And if you use a port with a mask, it's basically meant for allowing a port range to be matched. So it should not be too difficult. I think the only thing that the CNI providers would have to do is convert a given port range from integer to a port/mask in the bitwise form. So if you look at the man page and just maybe grep for TCP_dest, it has some example. Yeah, this particular
this one, right?
Yes. So this was introduced just to do that. So maybe it should not be that too hard.
Nice.
I don't know if I would want to write a policy that way. That looks hard.
This is just the field in OVS. So when you're creating an open flow rule for matching on a rule, instead of setting TCP dest equal to the port number, you set TCP dest equal to the port/mask in hex format, or so this is actually actually implementation detail. So your user doesn't really need to worry about all this. this is mainly for the CNI vendors who have Open vSwitch as a data plane for them to write that. And
I saw that. I remember the issue of qprox with fully random that then Winship dig into to see like the bitwise mark from the IP tables mango, and I said, okay, I'm not going to say like to the CNI providers how they are going to do that. I'm just going to say it's possible, but I can even understand what's happening here.
And I'm pretty sure there are some Open vSwitch libraries already in Go which does this, where you just supply a range for in integer format, and it will give you the bitwise mask port/mask for it.
This is almost the same thing as like the net mask from IP, Abhishek, but applied to the integers, something like that.
Could be. I haven't looked at that, but I think anyone who's programmed in Open vSwitch should probably be okay with this.
Yeah, like you would be okay with it.
I would say some of my team members are very well equipped with this. So.
This Kubernetes stuff is getting too complicated to me. Like it's an eBPF and then Open vSwitch doing this. I need to select something easier for my life.
I mean, I think it's kind of cool to look at. Like, I don't mind talking about it. It's interesting. I have a feeling it would not be.
This is nice.
Encoding in integers for users in that API previously doesn't like inhibit your ability to re-encode that in like a hexadecimal representation. Like these values are all the same. There's just different encodings. Like we don't have to show the hardest encoding on the front side, I guess.
Yeah, this is all.
We use that. All good.
None of this would be.
But the masking is hard, right? Even an integer mask is hard to reason about, right?
Well, once you start talking about trying to mask those values, then having them in like decimal integer becomes way more difficult, right? Like a lot easier to see a mask when you have the hex bit field, but it's still, again, the same whether you encode it in integer or not, right? Like just semantics.
Yeah.
Are we saying that we want to try to have a way to have this mask? Okay. Well, I'll be quiet then.
I think this is Abhishek's problem. So
okay. Best of luck to you, sir.
I would not mind like reading a proposal about this at all. Like it would be really interesting to read. And I've said this before, I'm a big advocate of us exploring things in this group sometimes that may not be super useful. So even if we chose not to do it, I think it'd be cool to see a proposal around it. And maybe you could convince.
I will try to understand this and see like what happens to justify to then Winship either, because that's Abhishek and then Winship problem, and I don't think they are going to be really happy with that. But
I think Dan, should also.
I think he can do that.
If he's written the OVS SDN Open vSwitch one, then
great.
we should do that.
So for the port range, I'm gonna add again the exceptions and Abhishek note in the drawback that there is already the implementation. I think that we can move forward, right? I expect like we can discuss about the validation in Slack during this week, and I want to try to close this like in the next cycle and ask for the SIG leads the review of this one, and also Jay, if we can move forward with yours, so we can start doing other stuffs either. Like
I agree. I would like to merge them together, even though we have talked about this and they are separate. But I feel like it's going to be a lot of work to get the CNI providers to say, okay, we got these new things, and it would be cool if we could coalesce those together.
And we are going to have like cycles of new things, because those are the first new things, and we are discussing about the FTDN and the services selector and the host node selector. So those are going to be cycles of new things, and they will need to follow this. So it's
so for the namespace by name one, I think one of the action items for Jay was to like double check if match names under namespace selector is going to be a breaking change. Did we?
Oh, yeah. I had the old implementation with that, but then I was going to redo it with whatever we come up with after today. So I need to redo all that. And I never finished testing the original one I did. So I have to do that.
Okay, yeah, just double checking, because I didn't want you to like do a bunch of work and then it's like, oh, it's breaking, so can't do it. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, the thing we don't want to break is just so I can bound what I'm trying to accomplish there. You're concerned about breaking the client, the Go client, right?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 layers of compatibility we need to worry about, like the actual like round trip, like JSON serialization on the API. Like if you wrapped like namespace selector under, you know, like another struct and put namespace selector or label selector as like an inline field, does that break like, you know, JSON serialization? I don't think it will, but we should really double check that, because if we accidentally broke that, it'd be really bad. And then the other layer of compatibility is if we wrap the label selector under new struct, that breaks like compile compatibility or like Go compatibility. And I'm not sure, like, I don't think we have defined rules on when we are allowed to break Go compatibility. I think we try to avoid it. But if there are very good use cases to break it, I think maybe we're allowed to, but we need to also double check that with the API.
So, yeah, I checked on that, and there was somewhere, I think it was Dan Winship mentioned in writing that we don't. The only thing we're required to not break is the YAML and the JSON. I don't have a reference to that though. I can try to see if I can find the reference to that. The other one, the nesting the name field inside the map is the thing. I'll just build and see if it compiles and works properly. Okay. So yeah, I do need to I do need to verify that. Now that I know we're going to probably what we're going to go forward with is a most likely canonical, or not canonical, but like initial proposal. I think I can do that kind of end-to-end validation.
Great. So we have a last subject about those running caps, and then I wanna check with the cluster scope network policy group how they are. But about this, Andrew, then posted that in the past we have not used feature gates for new network policy features. So I don't know if there is like a guideline for this, because in my cap I've wrote in like a feature gate, and Jay also wrote in his one. So and Jay
I took mine out.
Going to, yeah.
You do need the feature gate last time I checked. So it's true that in the past, when network policy was initially introduced, we didn't feature gate fields. But the guidance, I don't know when this guidance was added, but the guidance now for any new APIs added to a stable, or any new fields added to a stable API, you need to feature gate it and drop disabled fields. Otherwise, when you do a downgrade, you break the storage schema in etcd because you've added a field that is used on a version that doesn't support it.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So Jay, this is answered for you, right?
Yeah. So
I'll also fetch the docs for it, so we have a reference and we can post it there.
Great. Yeah, I'm gonna mark you here, okay, Andrew. So that's.
I mean, I feel like we need to do a whole API iteration because some of us are new to the API stuff, anyways. So I definitely don't think this is going to be the final, like, polished version of this for sure. But I guess I'm just going to add back in that we are going to do a feature gate. Yeah, maybe you can just, Andrew, if you want to just add that.
Yeah.
referencing there, then we can follow that.
So moving forward, Abhishek, do you have any update on the cluster scope policy cat? Do you need something from us?
Actually, I do not have any update because we canceled last week's meeting because of the EBPF summit. Some of the team members were busy in that, so we had to cancel it. So we'll meet again this week.
Great.
Perhaps next week. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. That's it. No problem. So moving forward, let's discuss about the FQDN proposal. I'm seeing Gobi already here. So Andrew proposed that we can move like with each of the proposals in the meetings, like focusing on one and getting that done, and then moving forward to the other ones. I think that's a good point to do. So we have. Do you want to share your screen, Gobin? So probably you can scroll down, scroll up, and say what you are thinking about that. That's okay.
I can try. I have never presented on Zoom, so let me see if I don't bungle this up. Okay. 1 second.
Let me see if I need to allow you to do that.
Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
I don't know how to do this, Andrew.
It's okay. I mean, I can just tell you to scroll down.
Okay.
Thank you, Ricardo. So a quick update on this. I actually went through all the comments. By the way, first of all, whoever's on the line and everybody else not on the line, thank you for the comments. And this is probably made me sort of think about this in 10 odd ways that I never sort of thought about. So this is amazing. What I did was I went sort of line by line through each of those comments, and I put if you scroll down, Ricardo, I put a section of open questions at the very bottom. And this is effectively, capturing all of the open discussions in the comments, which I didn't sort of resolve. They're still there, but this way I'm hoping to just sort of summarize all of the answers that we come up with and document them here. So the idea would be, there have been several questions around what is the guarantee that this feature will offer, right? And I'm not even getting to the implementation specifics, but what kind of semantics should it offer? What sort of is it a convenience thing, or is it an accuracy thing? Is it an L7 thing, or a network policy thing? And so there's been some identity crisis sort of questions here, and for what it's worth, I still think this is a very sort of valid use case from a convenience standpoint. And what I'm doing right now is going through some of the existing policy implementations, and we're sort of figuring out what the minimum viable product would be here. What's the minimum viable specification? So what I'm thinking here, and I would love some feedback from the folks on this line, Andrew, especially since you and I chatted about this a little bit as well. Let me know what your thoughts are. But what I'm thinking is we do egress only, and we for the sake of simplicity, don't do any pattern matching, and all of the guarantees are effectively rooted in the DNS implementation. So this policy by itself will not, it'll only be a convenience facade on top of whatever DNS truth is available. If some pod is able to bypass the DNS pods or service to get IP addresses to a certain, a URL or FQDN, then that's not something we can cover. I think there was a comment about this in one of Dan's comments, I think, said that that's okay. But I would like to be sure. So I'm trying to see if that is a good MVP definition. Of course, I'll document that here. But it's not going to be implementation specific. It is just going to be an API recommendation, just like network policy. And it'll be up to the providers, CNI providers, to implement their own versions of that API, just as we do today. That's kind of what I have as an update on the FQDN piece. I know that was a little too much, probably. Maybe I should summarize it more.
I had a hard time following.
My apologies. Which part did I lose you at? I guess maybe I should start there.
So basically, we're saying that we're gonna add it to network policy as an API recommendation, and kind of leave out the implementation to, like, we don't want to be prescriptive to the implementation, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah, because since some of these providers already have like FQDN support in whatever way, shape, or form, they could just as easily prescribe the fact that, hey, look, we already have this in our object or whatever. So if you're using our CNI, you can continue to use it for the same guarantees or whatever, and they don't have to use a new form of doing the same thing. Or they could simply, write a wrapper and have that API and go into another implementation. So I think that way it'll just sort of keep the doors open on however the CNI providers want to implement.
Right. So I think one of Casey's comment was that we shouldn't. I don't know if we all agree, but what he said was that we shouldn't add things to the API that we don't think every CNI provider will want to implement, like either as like part of their own CRD or like in general if they don't want to implement it at all. So are we saying that we're okay with adding new fields to network policy that a bunch of CNI providers may not want or have to implement?
Oh no, this is actually that's actually a good point. I think now we're gonna get into some of the oh, sorry about that. We're gonna get into some of the implementation specifics. I think to your point, Andrew, it might be easier to implement this as a standalone CRD object or something like a DNS policy object or whatever. And that way it gives you the freedom, it gives the CNI provider the freedom to do whatever with it, right? So they can say that we support it, or we already have a way to do this in another way, and things like that.
I just can't see, like, we already had some CNIs that support the networking stuff, but they don't support network policy. So if we add this field as a, just supposing that we add this field as a network policy thing, and having like a compatibility matrix of which CNI supports which fields from the network policy, that's only a supposition. I think that it might also work. I understand like KZ concerns about that, because like how is this going to be in Calico? Like if you have Cilium supporting this but Calico not, or like as then say how they support this in OVS in OpenShift. But I think that we probably just to not make those stuffs like a blocking thing in the proposals. I wouldn't say that, okay, we want support fields here in the API that CNIs doesn't support. I'm not strongly against that. I just think that we need to have mapped, like, or even the CNIs have mapped which sort of features they support or not. Otherwise, we are going to block anything like, okay, we are not putting port ranges because that's not supported by the IP tables that from Calico. We are not going to support match name because Cilium doesn't want to support match name. So
yeah,
I'm not against putting that in the API. I also agree that like having a CRD is okay. I'm just thinking about, we already had this situation before in Kubernetes, and like it was okay. You can use Flannel and don't have network policy, or you can use Calico and have network policy, or you can use
right.
Govind is suggesting that an MVP wouldn't necessarily have to be some waterproof, perfect DNS implementation for a security implementation, right? From your end as a user, right?
Is that a question for me, Jay?
Yeah.
Yes. So what I'm suggesting is that since this is not we're never going to be able to inspect the packet, the payload, I should say, we will not know what URL it's going out to. So the only thing we can do is look at the IP addresses from network policy. So it just seemed like the most reasonable thing to do is to use the guarantee that the DNS service provides, and that's the best we can do. So if that means that somebody already has some cached IP addresses that still point to an FQDN, but they never made a DNS request, we can't really protect against that using this tool. So yeah, it's not airtight.
It seems like if you go and you say you're going to change an API and you're not really 100% sure that the CNI providers are going to support you there, yeah, that's kind of a weak position. But if you go in and you say, well, I kind of want to make this API up, but at the same time, I kind of have a canonical implementation in mind that isn't dependent on any one CNI provider, which you have in this document, right? Like there's an implementation that people have suggested here, which you can build on top of any CNI provider. It seems like, I feel like if you build the thing that does this thing that they've suggested, which is you've got a core DNS plugin and then you've got a thing that creates network policies using those as primitives, that thing exists. That thing is complemented by a CRD. And it seems to me like that's an iteration towards this. It may be wildly successful. And then people will say, we got to get this thing into the API. But even if it's not wildly successful, I think you've got a useful tool there. I think that some people would probably use and that you maybe even be able to use.
Right.
So, I mean, it seems like there's an intermediate solution here that might be worth just doing, kind of.
You're talking about the CRD solution?
Yeah, the CRD, where we literally do the implementation that Dan's talking about right there, where you just plug in and then you build an operator that makes network policies under the hood. I mean,
exactly. Yeah,
that's your whole thing right there. Who needs CNI? Who needs a CNI provider? I hate to say it, but who needs a CNI provider? If you're okay with that solution, we can build that solution, right? Like we don't need a CNI provider.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So in fact, that's really the MVP. You're hitting the nail on the head here. That was my intent when I went through all of this and I realized that this what do we need to actually do in order to demonstrate value and really make sure that this is getting iterated on instead of just like a giant blob that sits there and we can't really address it. What you're saying is exactly what I'm suggesting, which is let's just do an MVP where we rely on the DNS semantics as much as possible. Whatever guarantees the DNS service makes, that's exactly what we can offer, and that's about it. And we can use a CRD, no fuss, no muss about like changing the existing API. Doesn't have any consequences on the existing providers. And then if it has a huge uptake, we provide a migration path forward, or we just leave it as it is. It's fine.
Yeah, to simplify it a little more, like I don't even think we need to translate things into network policy like resources. Like the plugin itself can just be the policy enforcement, and it watches the CRD or whatever.
Yeah, or you could do that. I just don't know what kind of dependencies we'll require from the DNS service, and whether that'll be sort of a, hey, now I need to plug in for core DNS or cloud DNS or kube DNS or what have you. So that's why I was trying to centralize it as much as possible that, if you have network policy, you can count on some ground truth that, it's enforced, whether it's IP tables or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It follows those semantics. So that was my only thing. But to your point, Andrew, you're absolutely right. We could even short circuit that even further.
Yeah, you could. Antonio has that solution in here too, right? So we actually have both solutions. I mean, we have two different solutions to this problem. So it's like, and both of them don't require a change to the network policy API, right? Antonio,
from them, right? You are saying, right, Jay? Like having a DNS network policy controller.
Yeah. Well, this is my thing that nobody likes my idea, but my idea is that.
Yeah, Jay, I do like that. I've seen that also. OpenShift folks, they do almost this way that you say, but not with the DNS, but having like a controller that reconciles the DNS queries to network policies. So we have some ways to do that. Just to clarify, I am not like against also doing CRDs. I'm just saying that I agree that we don't have to block our stuff. Like if we have something that one CNI doesn't want to support, because it's you know what I mean. Like,
well, the funny thing is that once you go down this CRD road, everything we're doing could be done with some kind of a controller or operator type thing. And so that even though I don't think I'll ever get a whole lot of agreement on that, but I mean, it keeps hitting us, right? Like the fact is, like even the namespace's name you could build. So once you start building an operator or controller thing, it might allow us to explore other problems that are out of scope of CNIs. So that's why I selfishly feel like this would be really cool, because this is the first concrete thing that somebody else has come from and said, so yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that we always get into these conversations because we don't have a default implementation in our policy, unfortunately. I don't know if we're ever going to cross that bridge, but hey, I don't know. In the interest of sort of making progress on this and figuring out what the MVP looks like, I'm more inclined to now just sort of go down the path of having a CRD, having a controller that monitors or snoops the DNS traffic and configures network policies, keeps them up to date as much as possible. So I think we'll discover some nooks and crannies there that need to be addressed based on the antics of the DNS service, and we'll sort of address them as we go along in the controller, I suppose. It would be great to have any expertise on this. If somebody's in DNS Ninja, please let me know. I'd be happy to chat with you. But honestly, like we're trying to figure out how we can get an implementation out. So if anybody's interested in sort of maybe I'll propose a DNS policy spec in this document as an MVP, and then people can comment on that, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, I still feel strongly that the enforcement should just happen from the DNS server. Like we don't need to go through creating policies, but we can discuss that in the document.
Totally. Yeah. I just personally, I'm full disclosure, I'm not an engineer on Kubernetes. I'm a product manager, so my knowledge of how source space works in Kubernetes is limited. If I can't anticipate how many changes and surgical things we'll have to make in the DNS service itself. So
and especially because like there's literally two canonical DNS implementations. There's kubedns or DNS. So I mean, if we get those two, like we have kind of basically 99% of users.
I see. Fair enough. Yeah,
and
makes sense.
You are not yet an engineer, Goldin. Welcome.
Funny story, Ricardo. I used to be an engineer at Google, but then I don't know. I moved to the dark side. What can I say?
Okay, so we are out of time. I would like just to suggest you to take a look into this cap of working kube-proxy architecture. I think that's it might hit us somehow, or with good ideas, or with some sort of re-architecture of things. There is some ideas of having a generic implementation of kube-proxy that calls even the same way that CNI does, I think. And as we have moved forward with the FKDN proposal, I think that we can pass through it as a sort of cap review in the next week, and maybe elect another story from the use cases for the next week, so we can pass through it, the selecting spot via services.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to own a story, that would be cool. We're looking to get involved if there's something you really care about.
Zen, do you wanna say something? Okay, so I think that's it for today, folks. See you next week.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. See y'all.